For some context, I'm a 31-year-old female. I frequently visit the nearby provincial parks here that are generally well used in Canada. It's rare I end up on a hike not seeing at least one or two people. I grew up camping and hiking and feel very comfortable in nature. I always inform people where I'm going and when I should be back. Safety first, right? So one day last year, I was going stir crazy, so I took myself out to a popular educational centre. A branch of trails stem from this one spot. Now they're not long trails, but are all interconnected, so it's easy to create your own distance. It was midweek, so I wasn't expecting to encounter many people, maybe a school group at most. I grabbed my backpack, lock the car and head out. It was a beautifully sunny day, mid-autumn, so it was a little chilly out. I was listening to the sounds of nature surrounding me. Some squirrels, birds, even a deer crosses the trail at one point. I was sticking with the main trail, which had educational signs identifying different types of plants as you went along. I made my way up to the first little hill and made my way down the path where it takes a sharp turn. Up ahead, I caught sight of a man wearing a dark blue jacket. Strange, I hadn't seen any signs of this person or heard of them whatsoever. Normally, I'm comforted seeing someone else, but this time my gut was not happy. I made a note of what the person was wearing and went along. Blue Jacket had taken the path I wanted to take to create a longer hike. It would have been a lot more secluded and less travelled this way, just a nicer path generally. So for once, I tried to be smart, listen to my gut, to just follow the main route back to my car. I had about 2 kilometers to get back though. Clouds decided they wanted to skirt across the sky, making the woods a little dull and ominous. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling very unsettled. The trees casted finger-like shadows that did not help calm my imagination at all. One of my favourite spots on the main trail had a few massive boulders and rock formations smack in the middle that you have to go around. Really neat for photos and climbing on a normal day, but today they fill me with dread. I can't pinpoint why at first, until I found some scuffs around the base of the rocks going the wrong way round. The trail's very obvious which way to go, left, and these markings were wrong. It's like someone went the wrong way around the rocks, dragging their feet behind them. An animal? Maybe. I can't figure this out. I wanted to turn around and go back the way I came from, but that would have added 4 kilometers back to the car. I stuck close to the far side of the real path, keeping an eye close on the rock formation. As I made it to the other side of the rocks, I caught sight of some blue fabric, the same blue jacket I saw earlier. The person now suddenly ducks down, as if they're trying to avoid being seen. For Blue Jacket Man to reach the rocks before me, he either cut his own path through the woods or sprinted 5 kilometers. I don't like the prospect of either option. Maybe he was taking a leak. Yeah, I'll go with that. I pick up my pace and dug my phone out. I texted my usual hiking friend telling them the details in case I went missing. I glance behind me, and again I see him staring at me. I ran the rest of the way back to my car, hopping in, immediately locking the doors, and curiously, there's not a single other vehicle in the parking area. This place was nowhere near any towns, so I have no idea where this person came from. I took a couple of minutes to sort myself out in the car, and as I pull out to leave, I look at the trailhead and that damn blue jacket was on the signpost that I had passed to get in my car, and no one's visible. I was so spooked out by this encounter that I refused to ever hike alone. So a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of Western MD, and we're about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we have done frequently when we decide to take some pictures and eat a snack at the summit. This area of the trail had a park, branches, benches and tables, and parking lots. So we're sitting and talking, and I noticed a man just walking around the park alone. He was walking aimlessly, staring at his feet, which confuses me, as he's in jeans, a button-down shirt and not exactly hiking attire. We now decide to set off on the last 2 miles of the loop. This park goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and is cut out of the mountain/bank, and the end leg is the parking lot where your car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turn to look at her, and I see the same man right behind her, following at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any backpack or hiking gear, and not even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really scared me. So, a bit more walking and he continues to fall very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe. This is a reason for him to pass us. In case he's following us, we'll realise. She immediately catches on to what I'm doing and we pull over. He looks very startled, and she politely says hello, and he just stares. This is when I notice that he is carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stands between us and he passes us. We wait to give him some short distance ahead, but immediately he slows down. We now wait for a bit longer, and he gets to the furthest part of the trail that has sight lines to us, and he turns around, looking up at us. We decided that something feels wrong about this guy, and we don't want to press him or pass him again. So we turn around and walk back up the trail towards a park with the tables and parking. A few minutes later of walking up the trail, I look back and see he's on the trail too. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area we were at before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail to the lot. There are more people around here, so we feel safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by, nothing. We are talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and is long gone, or is waiting on the trail where it's more desolated. While we're thinking this, we see a couple come up from the trail we're on, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction we're on. We approach them and ask if they saw the guy there. They tell us they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They describe the man as following us. We explain our interaction with him to the wife and go back and forth in conversation. The husband says we need to call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there, he was carving a stick with a knife. He's clearly armed. Needless to say, we call a ranger. The nice couple walked that fast leg with us to make sure that we can get to our car safely, and gave us their number in case we need anything. The rangers then rushed to the trail, but there's no sign of him. I wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad that I followed my instincts. I hate to think of what he would have done with a knife to us, out in the isolated part. A few months back, my girlfriend and I decide we're bored hanging around the house and spontaneously decide to go out for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appeals to both of us, and even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figure we have enough time to enjoy a hike before it gets too dark. We quickly fill our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes we had, and with that, we're out the door. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go into the mountains. We intended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking. We wanted to change things up and progress further up the mountain road of the trail that a friend of mine had mentioned to me. We kept in mind our time and figured that we could hike for a bit and simply enjoy the environment around us before it's too late. When we arrive at the trailhead, we see there are no cars left along the road where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we continue on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill. Then, this recoups the elevation at the bottom with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top, then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off the trail, some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with the coyote lurking round. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large fallen tree that made a bridge over the dried riverbed and decide to take a rest, climb around it, take some pictures. We're there for about 10 minutes and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance until she hears a rustle behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumption size of whatever made the rustling, but continue on only briefly before she decides she's done and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her. We turn around and head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my shoelaces and looked behind us for the first time on the hike. Now I can see a person dressed in entirely black with their hood on, a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. Now it's not something out of the ordinary, but why all black? It doesn't make any sense. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final section of the bend, I figure they're far behind us and there's nothing to worry about. Sooner than later though, they're behind us but much closer, probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before. We had increased our speed, and they have too, so this alarms us. We briskly walk around another bend, and as soon as we come around, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction on both of our parts as we start running without saying a word. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly come to a halt and look back at me as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point, I shout go, and we both sprint to the hill. What little light is left is making it very hard to get through here without tripping. We're both stumbling down it now, almost falling multiple times. I'm quite worried that I'm going to twist an ankle, but we make it to the bottom. But Must continue up the initial hill, and then we'll have made it out. We preserve up the incline and make it back to the car. I have a sigh of relief, my heart pounding and adrenaline racing as I start my car. I go into reverse and, what do I see? The same person emerges, breathing heavily. We finally get a glimpse of him. He has a pale complexion and dead eyes, and has a furious look on his face and was holding something in his hands. I don't take a second to see it, I just speed out of there, leaving him in the dust. I was backpacking through Pisgah National Forest in NC with my dog, just the two of us. We were exploring the woods around Little Coast Cove, open orienteering style, so we're not on an established trail. We'd been hiking throughout the day, following a circle, and towards the evening, I realised my dog isn't acting normal. She's very much caught up in the scent of something, and she won't let up. That night in the camp, she remained on edge, and startled off into the woods line, stopping, then came back to me, staring. I went about camp business as usual. Then, at around midnight, I got this prickle like I'm being watched intently. I let the feeling ride over for a little, but then I heard a rustle by the bush. I got up from the fire, pointing my flashlight towards the hillside, and a figure on all fours just manages to escape the beam, all but the towel. It was a towel I knew was not supposed to exist in the southern Appalachians. I cast my light again across the hillside and caught its eyes, two yellow glowing orbs, watching and waiting. At this point, I went into fury, grabbing my tomahawk, and charged up the hill line after the beast, screaming. The watcher wandered off, but neither I nor the dog slept at all that night. The following morning we left camp. At first light, I began hiking up the mountain to the ridge line which would lead us out. Atop the ridge line is a fresh mud track with a series of tracks left by an animal that no longer is supposed to exist in the US. They're catamount tracks, or what I believe to be. They commonly go by cougars in the east, but we've been stalked by a mountain lion just the same. Those tracks ran across the ridge, revealing that it had been watching us throughout the previous day. They weren't bobcat tracks, I know that. They were way too big, and I saw the eyes. I truly believe that one's escaped, and if it wasn't for my dog, I would have been mauled to death that night. The neighbourhood where I grew up was more or less suburbs, except the back end of it that borders a massive field where nothing has been planted in decades. Part of that border is buffered by woods, and it's in those woods where my friends and I would play. One day, we were particularly deep in the little section of forest. We were attempting to pick through what looks like overgrown dozer tracks. The woods are thick across NT, but the central/eastern proportion is thick with kudus in particular, and it has given us hell. We had probably made a mile of progress in this track when we come across a depression full of water. I hesitate to even say it as a pond, because it was perfectly round like a crater. The water had obviously receded in the middle, and was exposing the roof of an old car. At about this time, one friend found a license plate under a pine duff. It was tagged with buckshot. Next to the door, a full car door had been buried under a pine duff, riddled with bullet holes. Now it's certainly not an uncommon way to have fun in the South. Go out, have a few beers and shoot some junk with your friends. But what we found next, however, wasn't a run-of-the-mill Saturday night. We find bones. Our still innocent minds first assumed it was a white-tailed deer. We started dragging out the bones and laying them out by the side. Not sure if our objective was to make a museum quality deer skeleton or what, but that's what we did. Then the pelvis came up. I immediately recognized it because my uncle was a chiropractor and had a full model skeleton in his office called Mr. Bones that I would look at. The more I started to look at our growing collection, the more I started to see Mr. Bones taking shape. I got a gut feeling about being the oldest and I told us to stop digging. Something really doesn't feel right here. There was some protest, but I convinced everyone. Now we start hiking back the way we come from, but I can't stop thinking about those bones. That night, I told my mum what I found, then I had to tell my dad the story. At first, they're convinced that I'm just a dumb kid, but I know what I saw out there. They talked behind closed doors going back and forth. The next day, I told the story to 2 sheriff deputies and took them out to the area where I found this in the woods. About an hour later, there were police vehicles entering, packing the tiny dead end leading off into the woods. Chainsaws cleared the brush, and men in white suits with detective badges smoked cigarettes and talked amongst the other men as they carried bags from the forest, putting them into the vehicles. Then they were gone. And I waited months and months to hear anything, but nothing comes back. I asked my parents what happened, and they don't really know much about it. Eventually I stopped asking questions for the most part, and it faded back into my memory. Until one day I was home from college sitting by the fire with an old neighbourhood friend who had been there that day. He saw everything I saw. We started talking about it for the next few hours. We started doing research online but can't find anything. It was so baffling. I asked my parents the next day and they still have no idea what I'm talking about. His parents said the same thing. To this day they're so adamant that nothing happened. It's crazy. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband got out of town. They have a teenage daughter. Let's say her name is Alessa. At like 3 AM, I'm awoken by a weird rustling sound and look out the window and see movement. I saw a boy emerge from the bushes on the side of the house. I saw a bike tossed onto the lawn that wasn't ours. My first thought was that it's a robber checking out houses, but since he looked so young and came through on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide whether to go home or not. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's chance of life by calling the cops straight away, so I went out to the porch, flipped the lights on and said, "Hey, can I help you?" The guy appeared surprised and nervous, wearing a Letterman-style jacket, but once I got a clear view of him in the streetlights, he seems much older than I thought he was initially. He walked up closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alessa." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping he'd realise he came looking for a girl late at night to a grumpy old person. I'm thinking what must have happened is Alessa knew her parents were going out of town and she might have a secret boyfriend or something. It was late and I was alone with several kids, so I don't want him coming any closer to the home. Also, I thought it was weird he comes so late. To be sure, Alessa actually wanted to talk to him. I said, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said Alessa, but he messes up the last part of her name. I said, "You wait there." He started to walk up, but I got this sick burning feeling in my gut. Instinct kicked in. I "Oh no, stop, freeze." Then said, "You stay right there. This is private property. You don't come any closer, just wait." So I go in. Alassa is asleep in one room over from where the rustling first occurred. I wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I really don't know what the big deal was to have friends over at this time of night, but you have to tell them to go home." She says she has no clue what I'm talking about. I said there's a guy outside asking for you. Confused, she gets up and goes to the window, sees him and goes white as a ghost. He asks for me? Yeah, by name. Call the police. I've never seen him in my life. I call 911 immediately, but when I'm on the phone to them, Alessa started tugging at my arm saying he's coming up. I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it open enough to yell at him saying, "I asked my husband and none of them know you, and I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully the police come pretty quickly, and when he heard the sirens he bolted out of there. The police followed him but didn't find him. They advised us to take her off all social media where her account wasn't private, and if it is public, make it private, and then buy a heavy duty lock, and she slept in my room for the remainder of her parents being away." When I was 7 or 8, my family went to a beach and rented a room. We had the kind of rooms where you had to rent out both, and they connect through a door. Like, there's the doors to leave the room, and doors to the other room. In the room connected to ours, there's this army family, military dad, some kids and a wife. My older sister was supposed to be watching me, as we were down at the jacuzzi in the evening. As we're playing and hanging out, having a good time. I didn't get out much, was naive and all around a kid. We're both white skinned, blue eyes and blonde hair. This mum literally sits in the jacuzzi with us. She starts talking to us and is just making herself comfortable. I was very naive as a kid. Eventually, we start taking books, and she starts talking about her kids. Eventually, we start talking about books, and she starts to talk about her kids, and we're just having a good conversation. Really in depth, I felt. My sister decides she wants to go back to the room, but I don't. I want to stay and talk. So my sister goes back to the room. Now it's just 7-year-old me and some 40-year-old woman. It should have set off alarm bells, but not to me. So she starts talking about going and walking on the beach. It's 10 PM. She wants to go on the beach for a walk and get shells. I thought it was a great idea. I'd get to walk out on the beach at night. I felt so free and like a big kid. I didn't need my sister or anything, so I ran back to the room to tell my grandparents that I'm walking on the beach with Sue, or whatever her name was. I remember my grandmother reading her book, barely listening to me. She just stood off. So I start walking down the creepy motel corridor. So I'm going through the stairwell, which feels like it's out of a movie. Too bad I've never seen it. So I'm walking through the stairwell. The mum's way at the bottom telling me hurry up. While walking through the stairs, Army Dad comes running out saying, "Hey, I learnt about you. Your mum is calling you. It's really important, we gotta go." Basically grabbing me by the wrist, leading me out of the room. He knocks on the door and explains what happened. I never thought much of it until about a year ago. This woman was leading me alone to the beach at night. This army guy had a terrible feeling and intervened. This didn't happen to me, but my father. He joined the Navy somewhere around 80 and 84. He's told me many stories over the years, but this one sticks out in my mind the most as it's his first time at sea on a submarine. He recently got promoted and opted to become a submariner because of the exclusivity of the position. Less crew, usually only room for 1 or 2 people in your Pacific trade. Basically, you have to do the best to get on the sub. Anyway, he's on his first night out on the submarine. Everyone's asleep on their bunks. If you haven't seen them, they're usually stacked 3 high and in line on the side of the hull in a hallway formation. My dad got in one and it's at the very back. However, he wakes up at 2 AM to alarms and lights going off. Everyone's rushing out of their bunks and out to the hatch into the next section. My dad being the last one to wake up, last out of the bunks. Ended up to the latch too late. It closed, sealed, and locked in front of him with someone shouting on the other side, "Mike, find the leak." Apparently, a leak sprung somewhere around the bunks. It either had to be fixed or that section of the submarine would have to stay sealed in order to prevent the rest of the submarine sinking, and hence him drowning. Eventually he found it, sealed it, and the hatch was opened. He has lots of other stories, but this one scared him the most. I'm an 18-year-old female student, and from where I'm from, July is an exam period, so I have to drag my backpack around during that time. Anyway, it's 7 AM, and my exam wasn't going to start until 9, so I decided to call Uber and get there early because I live at least 1 hour away from the exam centre. The car arrives on time, and I go in. Now, I'm not the kind of person to judge someone with a first glance, but for some reason, the driver made me feel really uneasy. He was in his mid-40s, had dark circles around his eyes, and was smirking a lot. He was silent for a good 10 minutes, but he starts asking questions. He says if I'm a student, and I don't want to answer thinking that he'll try to hit on me, so I just lie and say that I'm a proctor, hoping he would back off, and God was I wrong. He starts to smirk and tell me he would always cheat on his exams, and that I was a mean person in a joking way for ruining people's lives. I don't know why I did this, but I chuckled at this comment, and it triggered him to thinking that I liked him. My bad. He then started to get personal, asking me how old I was, and if I would let my kid cheat. I lied and said I was 34, and that I have a 16-year-old kid. I was hoping this would drive him off, since I was old and had a kid, but he got creepier. He then told me I looked like a strict parent, and started saying weird stuff. He then said to me if my husband was strict like that, and started saying, "Oh, is he in your life or not?" And even thinking I have a husband, he still doesn't shut up. Now, I noticed he's moved to a completely different region from where I should be able to take my exam, going in literally the wrong direction. I start to panic, but was afraid he would do something if I confronted him, since we're in the middle of a rural area. So I decided to fake a phone call from my co-worker, pretending to talk to her and tell her that I'm in an Uber and I'll be there soon. And I'm kidding you not, he literally immediately turns a car around, going to the direction we came from. He continued making horrible comments, and I swear this turns my blood cold. As we approached the centre, he told me that I should catch someone cheating, come back with him, let him drive them so he can make extra money, and after that he would take me to my address. The creepy part is that he had studied it by heart, legit corpse, number, He was looking me into the eyes, said, "I know where you live." I still remember the mark he drove, a blue Nissan. If I ever Uber again and get stuck with a blue Nissan, I will cancel it no matter what. I didn't call the company because I'm afraid he knows my address. I just hate that this happened. My family loves travelling, like all the time, so about a year ago, my family took a trip to France. At this time, I'm a 9th grader and in high school. Before the trip, my mum spent a few months learning French. My sisters have some basic knowledge of the language, so we're set. So we flew into some country in Europe, I forget which, and took the train all the way to Paris. Once we arrived in the train station, we took a few minutes to prepare ourselves before heading out and looking for a taxi. We were walking when suddenly, a guy comes up to us. He knew some English and said, "Are we looking for a taxi?" Since he had a large van taxi. My family was happy since family, and there isn't enough seats in normal taxis, so we agreed. We walk over to him and he points out to a large black van with another guy sitting in the driver's seat. Now, I know, thinking of it, there is no reason for 2 taxi drivers to be in a car. The weird part was that it had no taxi indicators or anything showing what it actually was. I remember my parents exchanging glances at each other, but going along with it. At this point, we haven't even discussed prices or anything, even where we're heading. He just opened the rather large trunk and started chucking our bags inside there. At this point, my mum was worried. She demanded an answer on why there were no taxi indicators. The man started switching English and French and wasn't given a clear answer. She didn't push it. My mum asked for a price. It was a bit costly, but there's no other regular vans around. At this point, the man's getting to our lack of language and noticed my dad's attitude change. He seems more concerned. He went up to the man, stopped him at putting the last piece of luggage into the van and said, "Show me your taxi license." At this time, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a taxi license, and I guess he didn't either. His eyes widened and he seems nervous. In broken English he says, right, taxi license, and pretended to pack his pocket and act like he left it at home. My parents at this point grabbed our luggage, said thank you, we don't need one now, and quickly took us across the street where we merged with a large group of people. We see the van suddenly speed off. We eventually found a taxi terminal and a large van. We never spoke of the event again. But I know we were so close to being kidnapped, it horrifies me. My husband and I love to go driving. We prefer road trips, but on the weekends or nights, we have nothing better to do than to go around cruising and just drive around. We prefer smooth and not busy roads. On this particular night, we are bored and decide to go cruising. We went up north to a small town, about half an hour from the city where the roads are curvy and smooth. This town is close to the mountains, and if you follow this particular path to the main street all the way up north, it starts driving up a mountain. It's about 9 PM, and there are very few cars in the road already since it's a little cute town. But we kept going north anyway from the houses and stores, and eventually to where the roads start curving uphill. We drive up for about 15 minutes more, and it's pitch black when we see some blinking lights. As we get closer, we see a truck that's on the side of the road facing us. I'm getting the chills thinking about being all the way up there in the middle of nowhere, and a stranded truck on the side of the road appears. As we slowly approach, I tell my husband it's probably best to turn back. I have a bad feeling, but at this point, we're pretty much at the truck. He pulls up next to us. We see that there's a young blonde guy, probably in his late 20s, who gets up to our window. I get such a bad vibe by this and tell my husband not to put his window down. I think he also gets a weird vibe and actually listens to me. He kinda just loudly asks what's wrong, and the guy just says something happened to his truck and he needs a hand. His phone is dead. Now my husband asks what happened, but this guy insists on showing him and to take a look. He says it's very friendly and even calls him bro, and he's glad we pulled up. My husband says, you know what, I won't be much help because I know nothing about cars, but I can call help for you. My friend knows a lot about cars. The guy's insisting and gets upset. I'm now looking back at the truck, and I thought I caught movement inside the truck. I tell my husband I think we should go. Now, you probably saw the look of fear on my face because he puts the car in reverse, but as he did, the guy is now behind our car, so my husband decides to go forward instead. We drive up for maybe 2 minutes, trying to find a place to turn around since the road is so narrow. The road turns to a dirt road, and there's a little more space on the side, so he's able to turn the car around. I am dreading going back that way now, and our phones have no signal at all. In my mind, I know this could all be someone with genuine problems, but this doesn't make sense. I cannot help the feeling in my gut. We soon reach the area where the truck had been, and there's no truck at all. We drive maybe another 5 minutes, no trace of one whatsoever, and we're sure we've passed the place that he said. We didn't drive up too far to begin with. I am both relieved and terrified that the truck's no longer there though. If it had really broke down, how did it get help working again in such a short amount of time? Calming myself down, I'm telling my husband, hey, maybe they really did get it to work. Maybe it turned on all of a sudden and they drove off. Suspicious, yeah, but not impossible. As we keep driving through, the roads begin to straighten out. We notice far off the truck with all the lights off, and park to the side again and notice movement in the truck. I say out loud, why did they turn out all the lights? I think they were thinking we're still far enough away from them, but we see 2 figures get on the other side of the truck and crouch down as if hiding. We get closer and my husband floors it. As we drive past, the 2 men get up. One of them is the guy that we had spoken to earlier, and the other's massive. With a very surprised look in their faces, one of them turns and runs behind us trying to catch us. I kept looking back, but it's so dark. Now all of a sudden, I see the headlights in their truck, and they start driving in our direction very fast. My husband keeps going, and eventually, we lose the headlights. I kept looking back the rest of the way, so scared that they're somehow still following us. Maybe they turned off their lights again and I can't see them. Anyway, after driving for a very long time back to the city, we're convinced no one's following us now. We do call the non-emergency line given a description, but we don't get the plates, so it's pretty much futile doing so, just given a description of the guys we saw. I realise all this could be rationalised, but it makes no sense why one guy was hiding and how they tried desperately to follow us. I hate the fact that they're still out there. I just pray we never encounter them again. I don't know if this is an Eastern Coast thing, but in my little town, there's a twice the ice station. Basically, you fill up water jugs and get ice bags for cheaper than you can in the grocery store. I went out a few nights ago to get some water. because hey, who wants to be drinking tap water? My husband was home, and because I'm kind of heavily pregnant, he insisted that he go instead, but I really wish that he would have done. I was out at 1 AM, and it's dark for miles in the middle of nowhere. As I get out of my car, I open the back seat to get the gallon jugs and close the door. The moment I do, a dark blue truck van pulls up behind me. I presume that they're doing the same thing as me, and I don't really think too much of it. However, alarm bells start going off, and the alarm bells start screaming at me when the slide door opens up and two large men step out. It's about a 20-foot distance between me and them, so the first thing I do is pull out my phone and start making a pretend phone call saying, "Yeah, I'm almost home." As soon as they see me answer, one guy says "crap," and they both get in there, tires literally screeching as they bolt out of there. I throw the jugs into my car, empty, and lock all the doors a million times before I broke down calling my husband. He told me to write down the make and model of the car and colour, and we'd go to the police station first thing tomorrow. Now I don't know if they targeted me because I was a woman alone in the middle of nowhere, but deep down, I know they targeted me because I was pregnant, and I don't want to think what would have happened if they got me. When I was 16, some friends and I went to an outdoor centre concert thing. We parked to the mall and took a shuttle to the venue. For perspective, the mall is a 20-minute drive from our home, and the venue's another 20 minutes away in a different direction. During the concert, I end up losing my friends in the crowd. I don't care though, as I wanted to get to the front, and I could just call them after the concert ends. Well, of course I lost my phone somewhere in the crowd of people, and don't even notice until the last show wraps up. I search the ground as the people dissipate with no luck. Reluctantly, I just hop on the bus heading back to the mall, hoping to meet them at the car. The car is gone, and I start to freak out a little. But it's 10 PM when I head to the bus station to see when the next bus is coming. Just my luck, it's a special holiday, so no buses until 10 AM. I borrow a stranger's phone and call the two numbers I know, my mum and brother. My mum doesn't answer, but my brother does. He basically gives me the suck it up talk and hangs up. So I'm alone, scared, and a little drunk in a city I don't know. I try walking but quickly give up when I realise I'm basically walking down a random highway towards God knows where. Back at the station, I'm just staring at the map when a stranger creeps up behind me. He asks me where I'm heading and I say the truth. He is conveniently going to the same city, asking if I take a split to a cab. Realising this is my only option, as I said I don't have my own money, we get in the car. Turns out he has less than I do. We barely have enough to get to the heart of the city, which is a 10-minute drive from my home, but at least I know my way from there. During the drive, this guy gets progressively more creepy. He's aware that I'm 16 and he's 25. He scoots closer every minute, touching me, insisting I come back with him, even writing his number on my leg. As we get there, I realise the situation I'm in. We're about to get out at a quiet area at 2 AM, and the cabbie's gonna drive off, leaving no one to hear me scream. The second he gets out, I turn to the driver begging him to take me further, so I can at least put some distance between us. The cab driver said he hadn't heard a word the whole way, but definitely heard something odd. He asked me for my address and takes me all the way home, and the creeper stares in frustration as he drives off. When I got home, I offered to wake up my mum to pay him, but he declined, saying he's just glad I'm safe. I broke in through the kitchen window to get to bed and cried myself to sleep. I'm just glad the cab driver was so kind to me. I really enjoy going camping. I'm truly an outdoorsy kind of person. It's very rare that I ever have a bad experience while camping, but I did have one that stood out to me, and is one that I can't explain. So let me start off by saying this was a good few years ago, and everything seemed normal on the day. In fact, I was having a really good day, so I arrived for my 4-day planned hike and camp in the evening. I had a really easy to set up tent, so it didn't really matter what time I got there. No, I wanted to sleep on the first day because I was tired from driving. So I parked my car up and I realise I'm the only person in the parking area. I get out and hear some voices, but they immediately stop when I get outside. I look and realise that I've accidentally left the radio on, so I just turn it off, get my camping gear out and head out. Now everything feels normal. The sun's setting, so I can still see where I'm going, and honestly, the forest and area that I'm in looks truly beautiful. I'm not gonna lie, it's probably the nicest sunset I've ever seen. There was sort of a mist above the trees. I took a couple photos on my phone and I was really glad I did. I actually still use one as a screensaver, but that's not the point. I find this beautiful spot that I've been to before. It's close to a lake. I set up my camp and equipment, and what's better to do than some night fishing? So I head off towards that. I have an inflatable raft that I can use for my fishing. I have a small Bluetooth speaker with me and set that down and set off. I'm having a brilliant time. Unfortunately, I haven't caught anything, but I do have this strange feeling washing over me. It's almost like a paranoia that I can't quite describe. Now, the forests and wilderness can be a beautiful area during the day, but at night, even for an avid camper like me, it can be pretty scary. I stay still for a second, and I'm sure I can hear the same kind of voices from before. That's odd. I turn off my speaker so I can concentrate more. I know it's definitely not from what I was listening to previously, but I put my mind on fishing. I want to catch some dinner. Now as I'm fishing, I hear this strange thumping sound like someone slamming something on a tree. It's odd, it's almost like someone's taken a metal hammer to an old oak tree and is smashing it. It's in a very rhythmic manner though, stopping for a few seconds and starting again. Now, needless to say, this confuses the hell out of me, and I begin to hear more voices. I can't tell exactly what they're saying, but I decide that, you know what, I think it's better to be out in my camping site at least. That's where I have my weapons if I really need it, that I've buried now under some leaves. The thought flashed across my mind that, oh god, imagine if they found my site and my weapons, then I'd really be screwed, and I laughed to myself. So I start paddling back. As I do, I've realised that the sound has now stopped, but also that it's coming from the opposite side of the lake. I have a horrible feeling about this. I don't know of any other campers in the area, but hey, it's not the first time I've encountered anyone out there, and I make it back to the shore. As I do so, I get my stuff together, leave my raft deflated on the side, knowing I can come back for it in the morning, and I head out. As I do, the thumping starts again. This time it's louder and closer than it was before. Okay, that's really odd, and I've now picked up the pace. I'm thinking about calling out, but I realise it's not a good idea in case these are actually bad people. I glance behind me for a second, and I can just about make out the flash of a light before it cuts off the second I turn my head. No, I don't need any more signs, and I literally start sprinting back to my campsite. As I do, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched and followed. The thudding sound slowly stops as I'm jogging, but I'm not going to wait around for it. I quickly pack up all my stuff. I decide I'm going to sleep in my car just until I figure out what's going on the next morning. I look and thankfully find my gun, exactly where I left it. I feel a lot more safe now. I start sprinting towards my car, and as I do, I can hear rustling around me. I'm now terrified. I call out, whoever's there, I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's wild is this doesn't even deter them. I start to think maybe it's a group of animals stalking me like coyotes or something. The last thing I need. As I'm running, I can see the figure of a person near my car. I shine my torch and I can see the reflection of animal eyes. I don't really get a lot of time to figure out exactly what animal it is, but it gives me some relief knowing it's not a person. As I get closer, there's this disgusting smell. Just as I reach for the door, I can see that this isn't actually an animal. It's just an animal's head that's been freshly cut on the roof of my car. What the hell? I now let out a really loud scream that I don't even have to think about making. I quickly get in my car and turn on the lights. I can see the silhouette of a person in front of me now, who quickly ducks down. I instantly slam it into reverse, but I realise I'm having a really bad panic attack, and I need to wait at least 3 seconds or so before I start driving, before it gets any worse. Just as I'm doing so, I can see the flashes of more torches behind me. I instantly snap out of it, and immediately step on the accelerator and speed the hell out of there. I then instantly call the police to report what's happened. I can't believe that this actually happened to me. How could a nice relaxing getaway turn into this? How the hell did that animal head get there? Who are them people? The police agreed to meet me further up the road, and I agreed to help go back to figure out exactly what's happened. I'm literally shaking, but I feel a lot safer with the police officer there. He says he's never heard of anything like it before happening. When we get there, there's no longer a feeling of being watched. Disgustingly enough, the animal head's still on the floor, close to the exit where it rolled off my car. The officer says that someone must have done this very recently because of the way it sat and the blood around it. He does a quick patrol and can't find anything in the area. I go to the lake and show him exactly where I saw the first torch. I'm now able to retrieve my raft too, but there's no signs of anyone out there. He says he's literally never seen anything like this before, and that whoever done this is long gone, and I agreed to go back to the station with him to make a bigger report. Turns out, there's lots of reports of occultist activity in the area that neither me or the officer knew about previously. Apparently they make regular animal sacrifices, and worse, they attempt to kidnap people, and have done so before. Unfortunately for me, they never found exactly who did this, and I still have more questions than answers, and I never went back to that same area again. We live in Oregon, and we drove down to the coast of Northern California. We had a late start leaving our houses, and arrived at a little beach south of the Redwoods just after 9 PM. It's pouring rain and dark out, so we park on a dirt road that had access to the beach, and decided against walking down on the sand to set up my camp. My friend drives an old Toyota pickup with a camper shell cover in the bed, which has a mattress in the back, so we decide just to sleep on here. The beach area where we were is very secluded and belonging to a local Native American tribe. They didn't mind us visiting, as long as we're respectful. After talking for a while in the shelter of the truck canopy, my friend fell asleep before drifting off myself. I realised I had forgotten the passenger lock of the truck. All of our valuables were stored in the cab, so I hoped nobody would come along to rob us in our sleep. After a few dreamless hours, I heard the sound of the driver's side door handle of my friend's truck being lifted. That door happened to be locked, but I was awake, terrified that whoever had tried to open the door would now go around to unlock the side, or try to get in bed where we are. It was still dark out at this time, but I heard footsteps starting to walk around to the back. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the back window of the camper shell, in hopes of alerting the intruder that there's people here. I heard footsteps get a little further away. Then I heard the sounds of snapping twigs and something heavy being thrown. Then the man let out a long yell, screaming a swear word at the top of his lungs. It didn't take more than 2 or 3 yells before I woke up my friend. "Dude, there's a crazy guy outside. He tried getting in the truck, now he's walking around yelling," I blurt out as I shook his shoulder. We sat upright peering out of the windows, but it's still pitch black out. I check my phone and it's 5 AM. The sound of the man walking around the woods near the truck don't let up. He's still screaming now, and it seems to be getting louder. He would occasionally yell further away, but then appear closer. We sat huddled in fear for a good hour, unsure of what to do. His shout sounded as though he was full of rage, but he never attempted to get into the truck again. Eventually, the owners of the only other car parked there come to their vehicle and drove off as the sky started to lighten. We did not hear any more yelling or log frying after that, and eventually we're both able to sleep for a bit, waking up at around 10 AM. It's hard to believe that during that terrifying hour we heard what we did, and it was so vivid. We still had no idea what the man was doing or why he was so angry, but the guy screaming profanities still remains a mystery to me. Last summer, a good friend and I embarked on a backpacking trip through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. As fairly experienced day hikers, we felt comfortable in the Whites with our inaugural overnight trip. While planning, my buddy Ellis figured we could hike to a backcountry campsite to make our first wilderness night a little more fun. I wasn't going to disagree. Beautiful views, historic trails, and protected night in the dry river wilderness. I was stoked, to say the least. Before any hiking trip I do, a little internet search on the trails or shelters I'll be coming across. Throughout the mid-1900s, there were a series of these lean-to-ups, and down the dry river wilderness meant for backpackers or through hikers really looking to escape the crowds in more populated areas of the forest. Though as time went on, the Forest Service had other more pressing matters. Many of these shelters were dismantled, except Dry River Shelter 3, the last remaining shelter in the wilderness. On the morning of our hike, I met Ellis at the trail at the head and we set off. The sky was overcast, bringing with it a dense fog through the trees. The weather left us with nearly no visibility, so there went our stunning views. At least the trail consisted of prime, technical New England rock, scrambling alongside the river. Ellis and I made it up the presidential ridge, stopping by the lakes of clouds. The hut was filled with day hikers, backpackers, and through hikers all socializing together. We were even more rewarded with some sun and a brief glimpse of the dry river valley on the summit of Mount Monroe before the fog rolled back in. With dwindling views and a stiff wind, Ellis and I hustled below treeline, down to the river shelter free, our home for the night. Once we dropped off the ridge into the valley, we entered the wilderness zone where the rangers patrolled sparingly. Time to really be alone in the wild. As we trek into the wilderness, all signs of civilization disappeared and the trail was densely overgrown. Although it had been raining all week, there were no footprints in the mud either. At least we'd have some relaxing isolation, I guess. After about an hour or so of descending, Ellis spotted the lean-to just as our legs were asking for relief. I look up and there's this gorgeous old timber structure with a well-used fire pit alongside a cold mountain river. Pristine camping. As we settled in and explored the site, I found a small, bound notebook nestled into the corner of the structure. On the cover someone wrote, "Dry River Shelter number 3. Out of curiosity, I opened it, but found nothing more than a lone man's name scribbled onto the first page and a date. Just your standard log camping log. Oddly though, the man signed the book the previous day. We saw no footprints or signs of human life or animal disturbances on the trail here at the shelter. Rain can wash away tracks, but not all signs of animal life. Something felt off to me. I showed it to Ellis, who found it curious but nothing more than the sign of a single man. He convinced me that he's probably a hiking veteran and a professional at L&T. I bought into Ellis's thoughts on the situation and my mind eases now. At the sunset, we started a roaring fire alongside the riverbank. Ellis commented on how quiet the location was, having not seen another soul beyond the chirp of birds since leaving Crawford Path. The silence is eerie, but we figure that it's just civilization that's desensitized us to the wild that we're actually in now. The sun was setting, and we grew tired with darkness. Ellis took the lean-to, and I spent the night in my tent. Sleep came quickly after hiking 8 miles with 20 pounds on my back, but it doesn't last long. A brutally sharp snapping noise awoke in me. The only thing I could compare it to would be a 2x4 smashing into a tree. I think, oh god, a bear's come to search our food, and that's 50 yards away. But nothing out of the ordinary for New Hampshire. Sleep took over once again, and I remembered waking up to the sun rising over the peaks. How can you sleep with a bear there? I stumbled out of my tent to see Ellis also waking up slowly. As we made our morning oats and coffee, I wander around the site again to see if I can find the marks a bear's left. Instead, I noticed something odd. The small notebook is open. I swear I put it back where I found it. Closed and in the back corner of the shelter, not open on the floor. Hey, Ellis. Were you checking out this camp log last night? Nah, I passed out, man. It's not like there's anything to read anyway, he responded. You sure? I commented as I bent over to pick it up. The lone hiker's name was not so lonely now. At least 20 more names have filled the pages. The lone traveller, whose name was originally on the first page, could now be found several pages deep into the notebook. I tossed it to Ellis, whose face instantly dropped when he sees all of the names on it. Great. Now I know it's not just dehydration or delusion from the previous day. Dude, we must have seen that thing last night. There's no freaking way we missed all these names. How could we? This is when I began to tell Ellis about the snapping noise during the night. I received nothing other than instant denial. These sounds were not the results of some hooligans or backward crazies following us. Ellis was convinced. It wasn't a bear either. Ellis led us out of the site and we instantly made our way back. A year has passed since then, and I'm still not quite sure what happened on our night at the Dry River Shelter 3. The memory of seeing a single name written on the front page is so clear in my mind now, I could not have mistaken it in. Could I have made the noises? Obviously not. I was asleep and they're further away. Ellis was asleep too. I would have seen him. I don't like to think it was paranormal, but it really begs the question. All logical explanations have went out the window, and of course a bear didn't write in there. It just terrifies me thinking of it now. I'm a 17-year-old high school guy with a weak body. I live in a small town in the Philadelphians, and this town is surrounded by rice fields, with a highway going straight across it. Part of my usual weekend routine is to go jogging early in the morning. This is at some time around 5 AM. My usual jogging route is from my house, somewhere in the middle of town, to a small hill with a wonderful view of town in the morning. To reach my destination, I would have to jog on the side of the highway. From time to time, fog would appear on the highway, and once you're inside, you can only see 10 or 15 feet before it all goes white. So one Saturday, I decide to jog. I invite one of my friends, the same age as me, to join me, since he follows the same route anyway. We left home at 5 AM, proceed to the highway. As usual, a thick fog blanketed the highway. The cars that would pass by had their lights on, and there were several one-ways because of road repairs. As we enter the fog, we decide to jog along the side of the road, past a couple of roadworks, about 100 meters along each. Now all's well at this point. We're a bit exhausted, but otherwise fine. We barely encountered anyone else, and usually they're just fellow joggers. Then we come across another roadwork, and we saw this guy crouched down on the asphalt. He was wearing a dirty orange vest, and he had a similarly dirty hard hat on. We can't really see his face, but decide just to ignore it. He looks as though he's fidgeting with something in his hands, so we thought he was just holding a few tools or something. Also, there was no one there but us, me, my friend and that guy. The fog's thick as hell. My friend signalled to me to keep a distance from the guy and I followed him. When we get closer, we can hear him humming a strange tune under his breath, which in of itself isn't that weird, but boy, we were wrong. As we get closer, he starts acting erratically. He stopped for a moment as I passed him, then starts laughing. It wasn't a regular laugh. It sounded sinister and a little dry. It was really loud, so it began to freak me out. We didn't increase our speed at this point, as we think he's messing with us. But he doesn't stop. He just kept laughing and laughing, and we knew it was beyond a prank. I can't describe his laugh more than I just didn't trust it. We didn't look back. We were speeding up now, as we were starting to see the hill. I was gasping for air, but somehow I didn't let that stop me. I forced myself on, and my friend was doing the same. He was probably 50 meters behind us when I looked at him. He had stopped laughing, but now he was standing straight and staring at us. He called out to us in my language in an arranged tone. That's when adrenaline kicked in. I just ran and ran until we reached the hill. In hindsight, I don't know how I was able to push myself for so long. When we finally arrive at the top, we're exhausted and nearly collapse on a cement bench and stay there for over an hour. Like a breath of fresh air, my friend laughs in a comedic manner. We then walk towards home. I haven't ate yet, I was so hungry, and as we passed the road we saw the guy in. He's no longer there. The only people there are wearing construction outfits that are working on the traffic signals, but nowhere near the man. As I got home, I told my parents about it and they said it's probably a nut job looking for someone to rob, who's probably stole the outfit, and I never went jogging again in the fog after that. This happened a few years ago when I was mountain walking. We started as a large group, but after some time of everyone choosing their own pace, I ended up walking alone. I was walking downhill through a thick forest area when I slipped on an unsteppable part of the trail, falling fully. It hurt quite a lot. Before I could get up, I see a deer walking out of the trees to my left, standing in front of me. This is not natural, because deers usually avoid human contact. Something was really off about this deer. I didn't know what. Its eyes appeared lifeless, filled with uneasiness. Then it opened its mouth to show multiple rows of what appeared to be razor-sharp teeth, and let out an ear-shattering scream. It sounded like nothing I ever heard before. It shouldn't exist. I watch quite a lot of horror movies, and yet none have come close to the scream of this. It was so demonic. After that scream, it closed its jaws and walked away to the side of the woods. Now, I've never told this story to anyone else before, but I'm sure what I saw was a Wendigo. It just horrifies me knowing that I saw this thing. For a second when it happened I thought maybe I've hit my head, but I had no head injuries whatsoever and I knew exactly how I landed. It almost put me off running in the woods entirely. When I was young, I worked as a backpacking guide in Western NC. My schedule dictated a full 8-day shift with 6 days off. During those 6 days to myself, my other co-workers and me would play in the woods. In the summer, you can't beat a mountain swimming hole. One of our favourite activities was called Paradise Falls, alternatively called Wolf Creek Falls. This is a cliff jumping spot with a huge swimming area, a tiny slot canyon and an inner pool. Most will venture just to do the small jump, even though it's the smallest and arguably least accessible. Even though the jump is almost 9 foot at most, you must do 10 minutes rock scaling to get there. We are all adventuring in and out from inside this tiny canyon, and you can't see the main pool. Well, we got to the jump and coaxed the first person off, a fellow guide who had never been to the spot before. She jumped successfully and swam into the main pool and beach area. Then she screamed. Because she was now out of sight, myself and another guide jumped in together and swam the short distance to her, with the others in tow. Of course we figured she was injured somehow. She was treading water and just staring wide-eyed at the riverbank. When I looked to the shore, there stood a man. He's massive, easily 6'7", and appears to have no hair on him, wearing beat-up overalls. Perhaps the most disturbing is that he had folds of skin all over his body. Imagine the Michelin Man, but this is on his face, arms and chest, everywhere with these weird layers. He's also armed with a shotgun, staring intently at us. He just stood there and watched as we grab anything important and speed out of there. He walked slowly back into the forest and we never saw him again. Around 8 to 10 years ago, I was at a lake way out in the woods on some land that my dad owned. I was alone aside from my dog, a terrier. I had only been fishing on the little pier in the southeast corner for about 10 minutes when I get an almost overwhelming feeling of being in danger, and then notice something or someone watching me from the tree line on the opposite side of the lake. I was a kid, but somehow keep composure. For some reason, I felt it important that whatever it was did not know I was aware of them. Anyway, it started moving slowly from tree to tree, near taking its eye off me, but never truly facing away from me. The lake's about 70 yards wide, so I can't really see details, but I know where they're facing. After realizing that it was following me, I pull my pole down and walk down the pier and up the bank towards the trail back of our cabin, which is about 1/4 of a mile away. Once I hit the tree line, I bolted to the cabin and waited there with one of my dad's guns until my parents got home. The only witness I had was my dog, and he saw it as well. I know because when he saw the figure, he instantly starts growling in a low tone until I make him stop. I have no idea who or what it could have been or what the intentions are, but they're most certainly not good. This took place in southeast Mississippi near the Alabama border back in the 90s. We didn't live there, but we spent most weekends up there. I know it couldn't have been a normal person because our nearest neighbour was a very old couple who literally lived miles away. Aside from the lake area that our cabin's on, the surroundings very thick forest. The figure was extremely tall as well. I have a very good memory, especially for details. Also, shortly before I noticed it, I got a very strong feeling that I was being watched. I never felt safe there again, and I was so glad my dad sold it. This incident happened to me when I was younger, probably around 19 or 20. I used to drive around the countryside in the woods for hours on end, up to literally 6 hours, smoke cigarettes while I listened to music daydreaming. I've been through a lot, so this is a nice way for me to let off steam and digest all the badness that happened to me in the past few years. There is a route that goes into the southern part of my state and eventually takes you to Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. If you keep going all the way, it will eventually take you to Florida. It was a road I found to be very fond as it intersected with a lot of interesting places. It could take you to cities and beaches alike, all the while somehow remaining isolated and rural. On one of those day trips, I was driving through a heavily wooded area that opens up into a field lined with trees on my left. I was pretty zoned out at this point, but something on the side of the road immediately caught my attention. In fact, it even seemed that time slowed, or I could see this apparition more vividly than any other thing I've ever seen in my life. What I saw was an older, balding man dressed in a full Catholic priest garb. His mouth is open, appearing to be in grief, screaming at the sky. He was standing in front of a dead deer, a buck. From what I recall, it was around 3 points, maybe 4. Behind the deer was a 1970s Crown Vic style police car with its lights on. It had no markings on it whatsoever to signify what country it's from. And no one's in the vehicle. I don't even think it had an engine running sound. It appeared as though the vehicle had been parked there all day. The other odd thing about this vehicle is that it has no damage on the front end to show that it's responsible for hitting the deer, nor was there any blood or anything. The deer seems fine. Taking a step back, trying to think of what I saw, it had the appearance of being staged or set up somehow, as if it was a prop for a movie. Everything was just so odd. For the speed I was travelling at, the glance I cast on this spectacle was only 4 seconds, but it so abruptly singed into my mind now. I have never seen anything like it. For some reason I started crying after seeing it. Did the forces that shaped time or something just merge and I saw something from back then? I don't know, I've even been on the same spot from this trip, and there's never a trace of it, not even the body of the deer or tyre tracks from the police car that could be seen. Like a breeze, it was gone. A thing so out of place it could not have been from its surroundings. I have no answers to any of these questions. Only a lack of closure for something that's scarring my brain. I love to go for night jogs, and my dog loved to accompany me on them. I live in a very rural area. There's literally miles of forest around where I live. Some people might be scared of night jogging because of this, but to me, it was normal, to be honest. So when I went for a jog one evening about 4 years ago, nothing felt different. I had my dog with me, and the sun hadn't started setting, but it was close, so it meant I still had a while worth of sunlight, enough to get a good jog in. So I get my headphones on and set off like normal. Now from the moment I set off, I had this eerie feeling like I was being watched, and I just couldn't shake it for the duration of the journey. It was really odd. I've literally never had that before. I always felt pretty safe because it's so close to home. But anyway, that wasn't going to deter me. I had some really good music on my phone, so I was really content. I started listening to some podcasts and really unwinding. I stopped for a moment so me and my dog can grab a quick drink. Now I'm pouring water into my hands at a cup for my dog to drink out of when he suddenly stops and looks around. I think this is really weird because he was acting fine up until this point, but literally it's like something's drained the life out of him and he doesn't want to move and cowers next to me. I think this is really odd because he's literally never done this before, and that feeling of being watched won't leave me, but I've kind of grown used to it now. I decide to walk a little further up ahead just to see if he'll start acting normal. But he doesn't. Instead, all of the life suddenly returns to his body, and he starts barking very aggressively. I've never seen him like this before, and I look up to try and see what he's barking at. And suddenly, my heart drops. I can see 4 hooded figures up in the tree line staring at us holding torches. They must be some kind of cultist group because of the way they're dressed. This is the stuff of nightmares. I go to shout out to them to say we mean no harm, but words won't come out. One of them looks at me, raises their finger to their mouth and gestures for me to be quiet. And they continue off. And that's all I needed to see. I immediately start running like I've never ran before. My dog was so scared he was running slightly ahead of me, and ended up sprinting the entire way home before the sun had even set. It was that fast. And from that day, I never went night jogging again. It was back in 2010, and I just started college. I arrived pretty early as the traffic I figured would be much more worse than it turned out to be. So to kill some time, I decided to go to a Walmart across the streets. After shopping some MGT and buying some food, I made my way out, and once I stepped off the curb, a man started following. This guy is probably between his late 30s and early 40s. He looks pretty unkempt, ripped jeans and looking old. He has a faded shirt that looked like it was once a designer or had writing on it, and a baseball cap that only showed somewhat of the writing on it. Once he stopped, he come up to me and said, "Hey man, I hate to bother you, but I was doing construction work and ran out of gas in my truck. Could you help me out and drive me to the gas station, please? I'm alone and pretty desperate." Obviously, that seems sketchy, so instead of a lift, I offer him $10, thinking it might be a guy down on his luck. To my surprise though, he immediately shot down my offer and instead continued insisting that he can be driven to the gas station and pay for gas, and then he'd drive me back. Needless to say, this all seemed incredibly bizarre, and I told him no and that I'm in a hurry. Now instead of leaving it alone, he began to tell me, "Man, come on. I'm alone here and my truck is on E. I'm stranded by myself." When I continued to walk away, he began to try and grab at my arm while continually begging. I quickly realized that we were in a weird position, and every time he went to grab me, I walk away. He was leading me more and more away from the store and more towards a parking lot, which was not very full this early in the morning. Now I really don't want to be led away from the store. So I walked back towards the store and I said I forgot something inside. He pretty quickly backed off since I made this comment. I think he didn't want to go inside the store and risk being seen by others. This may sound like overreacting, but by now, I'm freaking out. I've never had someone actually try and grab me like that, and lots of things are running through my head. Not wanting him to do anything else, I alert the front desk about what's going on and they said they'd handle it. Now honestly, I don't know if they did or didn't, because I quickly went to the other exit and sprinted to my car. Once I was in my car, I noticed he was walking away from his spot, and I assumed that either they kicked him out or he accepted defeat for the day. I was curious, so I watched him walk to the back of the parking lot and get in a big truck. My heart sank when he pulled away, as I noticed 3 other heads pop up from the back seat who were hiding out of view. To make things more sketchy, he didn't pull up to the nearest gas station, instead pulled onto the highway, obviously something someone alone would not do, and not running out of gas. I need to mention first, I'm an insomniac. Oi, he's part of the gang. 2 weeks ago, I felt I would not be able to go to sleep, so I decided to go for a walk at around 12:30 PM. Considering that I'm 6'2", 250-pound male in decent shape, I never felt scared to walk at night, thinking more the opposite, that people might be concerned about me. But around 10 minutes into my walk, I got a chill in my spine. Something wasn't right. I glanced around me and noticed someone on the other side of the street wearing a hoodie walking. I try and shake it off, telling myself it's just another insomniac maybe. But the chill would not go away, and something's off with the other guy. I start walking faster, deciding I'm gonna cut my walk short and head home instead. Now he even starts walking faster. At this point, I was sweating like crazy. He's keeping up the pace. 5 minutes have now passed and I'm sweating more. I turn my head and he's there still, but I get a better look at him. That's when I notice something else on the side of the road. It's another person wearing a hoodie about 3 meters behind me. My brain goes to panic mode and I start running as fast as I could. Soon, I heard their footsteps catching up to me. This is by the point I'm close to home, so I knew the layout easily, but they're very close. I jump over a bike rack and went down into a dirt trail that went into a small forest near my house. At that point, I knew they were still following me, but were not right on my trail since there was a delay before they hit the dirt path. My lungs are on fire, and I don't care. I diverged from the main path and went into the forest, running through the trees in a smaller path that led to one of my neighbour's backyards. I ran up to the other side of my street, to my house, turned the corner, and go through the bushes around my house, entering my back door, with my whole body on fire. By that point, I peeked through my window and saw them running past my house. I was safe, but I saw something that made my body go from burning to freezing in a split second. Both of them had knives in their hands. Now I don't know if it was because of the running or because of the fear, probably both, but I end up throwing up. So to whoever those guys were, I hope I never see you again. In 1989, I went camping with my friend and his family in the White Mountains in Arizona. We were either in Sholo or Gear. My friend's family slept in the camper while the friend and I slept in the 4-wheel drive Blazer. I was about 5'10", and I remembered that the Blazer was lifted, making it hard to climb into. I was sleeping in the front seat while my friend was sleeping in the back seat. Around 2 AM, I woke up to a strange dark figure staring into the vehicle at me. It was so large that it covered the entire front passenger window. The hairs on my neck and arms were standing up, and I'm frozen in fear, so much so I can't even alert my friend. I just laid there motionless. I've watched, and he's watching me for minutes, until finally walking away. I remember telling my friend's dad that morning, and he brushed it off as just another camper. But what bothered me is that it must have been a massively tall person to be able to peer in like that, or they literally climbed up to look in. I'm much older now, but this has always haunted me. I just wish it was taken more seriously at the time. I was returning home from a friend's place at about 8 PM. I had left my phone with my mum and had absolutely no money with me. My friend found me a cab and gave me some money for the fare. The cab driver told me that he had to recharge his phone in the middle of the ride, and I saw him talking on the phone in a shop nearby. I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, when he was driving, I noticed that we're in the dark and isolated part of the city, and there was trash bags everywhere. We were on the street for a long time when suddenly, in the middle of the ride, he said he had to make a call. He was talking to someone while making sure I didn't hear it, and I start getting alarmed. When he comes back in the cab, I pretend that my wallet was my phone, and in the local language, pretend to tell my mum the number of the cab and the description of the driver. That seemed to change his behaviour, and he was completely cooperative with me and drove me wherever I wanted. My parents were very angry at me when I got home and told them this, and the story still gives me chills. Some 20 odd years ago, I was reconnected with a family member. Said family lived way up in the hills of Northern Carolina and had given me directions to their house. I was driving my vehicle with my sister in hers, following behind. We each had CB radios, so we communicated on the way. Now while we're driving, I thought I was on the correct road, and the dirt road immediately climbed at a very steep incline. We slowly make our way up, and around this road, it comes out to a dead end. At the dead end was an old rundown house with a huge front porch. On the porch was lots of objects, including an ironing board leaning against the window, crates of soda, and some bags, etc. An older gentleman was sitting in a rocking chair and had a long rifle sitting across his lap. To his left, I assume is his wife, who had one of them old-time washer tubs under her feet. Then there were several barefoot kids running around. They had stopped when we pulled up to the house. It just feels really odd. Every one of them stops and starts staring at us. I slowly rolled down the window and said very politely, "Excuse me, sir, I think we took the wrong turn." He slowly rocked in his chair and grabs a rifle, cocking it, saying, "Yep." I pick up the CB and scream to my sister to back out of it, and we speed all the way back to the highway. It's easily one of the most surreal things I've ever experienced in my life. I often like to go out running in the summer or whenever the weather is nice. This happened a week before I was supposed to start high school. I thought about going running that day, but I got the idea in the morning, and I run in the evening while the sun is still up, but it's not boiling hot. Well, of course, I forgot my promise to myself, and only remember it at around 9 PM. Now it's the end of summer, so the sun is setting much sooner than I'm used to, and I go, I'll get back in like an hour, so I'll be fine. I already have been putting off running, so I don't want to put it off again. I should probably mention that I'm female though. And even though a lot of girls I know change the side of the road they walk on when they see someone who appears drunk, even distantly, I always call them idiots, because I'm ready to run, or take the first route out of there whenever someone tries to get me. And I also live in a far less populated area out of town where literally everyone knows each other, so I felt extremely safe. What a naive fool, I know. So I go out and start my run, and it's fine. It's getting a bit dark, but I can still see the running track is all good. So I start feeling pretty chilled out. I see a pair walking in front of me. When I get closer, they turn out just to be teen guys, and I run past them with no problem. When I finally reach the usual part of my run where I turn around, a cemetery, it has already gotten pretty dark. I drink some water from my bottle and just stand under a tree next to a gate in the territory of the cemetery, but don't sit down where I usually do, because the bench is next to a fence and the darkness has finally made me uneasy, realizing that I'm alone. It's pretty funny that that's what scared me the most at the time. When I was catching my breath, I stay for a few more minutes just listening to the wind. I see a bike drive past the cemetery, taking the route I will take while running back. I leave my resting place, and it's gone really dark. Dark enough that I could barely see 2 meters in front of me. I start slowly running back. After 15 meters, I hear voices. Couple more, and I can clearly hear someone talking now. My thoughts immediately jump to a conclusion that there's at least 2 people in front of me if I'm hearing a conversation. Now I slow down, even more until I finally get close enough to hear what's actually being said. Keep in mind it's completely dark, and this road doesn't even have street lights, so I can't see anything. I get close enough to finally make out words, and my heart sinks at what I can hear. I can't recall exact words, but it's along the lines of, "I see this girl. I could just pull her into the bushes." There were tall bushes lining either side of the track. As I've said, my heart stops, but I immediately go into fight or flight. I can hear my heart beating in my ears. I'm full of adrenaline. The bad kind. I know I just can't stop, or he'll know I heard what he said. So I continue to walk, but thank God the track is separated from the road by a small grass field. So I go to the side of the road, making some distance between us now. I keep looking at him. Keep in mind, I still don't even know how many people are there. But I see a square of light, presumably from a phone. I then hear him jump on his bicycle and drive off. He's talking on his phone. I walk on the side of the road for another good few minutes until I'm sure he's far away from me, and once I get back on the running track, I sprint like crazy to get home. All the way back I'm literally shaking with fear and looking at the bushes, so worried he's going to jump out after me. I had my water bottle ready to throw it at them. When I finally reached the first road lights, I felt like I escaped death. This is the most scary thing that happened to me while I was jogging, and I've never went out that late again alone. This occurred when I was 18 and backpacking my way through the world. I always looked a few years younger than my actual age and often had problems getting into places. I often find myself hissing, "No, I'm really an adult," to the people who refuse to believe my ID card. I arrived in Western Australia in January in a little town that looked nothing like the brightly coloured postcard world that I left behind in Sydney. I rented a car and was getting used to the Aussie way of driving and didn't pay attention to the fact that I'm running out of fuel. So naturally, now the car suddenly gives up. I wasn't worried though. I had a spare tank in the trunk. I had problems getting the lid off though. No matter how hard I pulled it, it didn't give in. So I started walking back to the little cluster of shops I spotted earlier. I was greeted by a man on an ATV-ish thing, sitting outside a shop. He nodded in the direction of the road and said, "Problem with the car, missy?" I must have looked puzzled because he smiled and said, "No one comes walking in here from that direction. There's nothing out there." I explained the situation and he listened sympathetically. "Do you rent the car from the Free Freddy? No wonder he gave you it. You can't trust that bloke, you see." He introduced himself as Charlie and quickly got off and offered me a spare tank, saying, "You want to ride back? It's an awfully warm day. No ozone layer here, you see." He was speaking weirdly. I felt a bit stupid hesitating, but he seems like a nice guy. And he was right. The sun was terrible. My shoulders already burnt despite sun cream. He must have sensed my hesitation because he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "I'm not the boogeyman. I promise you. I just don't want anyone out here in this weather. I would have offered you a ride if you're a 40-year-old bloke too. Here, take my helmet. My head ain't worth protecting anyway." And so I get on the back of his ATV, the spare petrol tank in front of me, and get a somewhat uneasy feeling in my stomach. "Just tap my shoulder if you want me to slow down, alright?" He drove the short distance to my car, but he didn't slow down. I tapped his shoulder again and again. He drove past it. In the rearview mirror, I could see him grin as he speeded up. I can't jump. The speed was so high it would have killed me, and I had no idea where he was taking me, but I knew his intentions were evil. This continued for 30 minutes, until I could see a rest stop, clearly made for people to stop and enjoy the view. As we approached the rest stop, I see my chance and grab hold of his throat with both hands, squeezing as hard as I can. I felt him struggle to keep the vehicle on the road, while fighting for air. As we come up alongside the rest stop, he had no choice but to stop. I threw myself off, tossing the helmet and screaming loudly enough to wake the dead. There was a truck there, but no one in view. However, only a moment later, the door to the loo opened and this terrifying looking man with a beard pops out and demanded to know what the hell was happening. I pointed to my abductor and cried that he tried to kidnap me, and the grisly man tried to grab a hold of the abductor but wasn't fast enough. Soon, he was gone. The grisly man turned out to be really nice and phones the police for me, waiting with me until the police arrive. Since that day, I don't judge by appearance. Charlie was a nice looking person and seemed to have good intentions. George looked like he had been awakened from his ancient lair, but was a really good guy. I later made my way back home, and this is by far the creepiest thing that ever happened to me. Back in 2000 or 2001, I was driving by myself from visiting my mum in Colorado back to Arizona. I was in a station wagon and had a desk my mum had given me that was my grandfather's. I've always been scared driving at night, and I'm always worried there's someone in my back seat that's gonna get me. This might be because I've watched far too many scary movies, or because my mum's paranoia rubbed off to me. I was in the army and drove back and forth a lot to visit her. She would get mad at me for sleeping at rest stops or gas stations, telling me someone's gonna kidnap or kill me. But I just didn't want to be bothered with the hassle and expense of a motel most of the time. So I'm driving on an empty section of highway late at night with no other cars around. This red truck comes up behind me, flashing me with his lights and honking his horn at me. I was thinking to myself that there was something wrong with my car. Maybe there was something wrong with the desk in the hatchback. Because why else would somebody be so insistent on me pulling over? So I pull over and get out of my car. As I'm getting out of my car, he's directly behind me, still flashing his lights and honking his horn. I go to about the middle of the car. I planned on going to the back to see what could have been wrong with my car when it hit me. Why is he still honking at me when I'm getting out? That's odd. Then he gets out of his truck. That's when I knew something just wasn't right. I jumped back in my car and sped off. The nearest exit's 50 miles away or so. He follows me the entire time. I take the first exit and go to a crowded grocery store with a laundromat next to it. There was an ambulance parked at the laundromat with its lights flashing, and I'm next to it. I figured there was an ambulance, so there must be police officers there. Now the man stayed in his truck in the grocery store parking lot watching me the entire time. I was terrified. I didn't want to get out of my car and felt like an idiot if I would have had to tell someone what happened. I waited an hour and finally he left. After he left, I waited a little longer before continuing my drive back to Arizona. I was paranoid and watched for any red trucks the entire time. Fast forward about 5 or 6 years, I was watching a crime show on TV, and what story pops up? One about a man on that exact stretch of highway with the same red truck, using them tactics to get a woman to stop before murdering her and others. I'm so glad that my gut told me something was wrong, and I got back in my car and kept on driving. This happened to my wife while we were dating. When we were dating, I lived in southern New Hampshire and she lived in Philadelphia. Most of the time, I would come down and visit her. Since she works at college, she had a few weeks off in December. She decided to come up and stay with me. She's packed a week's worth of clothes and her cat in the car and drove up after work. Driving on an interstate at night means coffee, which means bathroom breaks. She pulls into a rest stop in Connecticut. By rest stop, I mean bathroom, vending machine, and a rack of tourist brochures. As she's walking towards a building, a man, wearing jeans, an army jacket and knife cap, walks out between two cars starting on her. The man immediately reaches out, grabs her head with both hands. He's standing in front of her, arms out straight. She's not able to pull his hands off her head. He's staring into her eyes with a detached expression. As she described it, I think it's the same expression I use when I'm trying to debug or figure out why something isn't working. He's moving her head back and forth, keeping her off balance, keeping her at arm's length. She stares back. He seems to evaluate her for a minute or two, then lets go and quickly walks into a wooded section. She runs into the rest stop, finds an attendant. She uses the bathroom, then tells the attendant is willing to walk her out to her car to make sure she leaves safely. She walks out with the attendant and notices that a white van that was previously there is gone. She gets in the car, thanks the attendant, and drives off. About 10 minutes later, she's processed what happened and calls me. Then, the bit about the van worried her, but terrifies me. We talk for a little bit. She's familiar with the law enforcement and offenders and have a brief that this wasn't just a foul mugging. She talks to the police, but they didn't seem to be too interested. What worried her the most was that her cat would have suffered in the cold if something happened to her. After that, every time I drove between NH and PA, I've stopped at the rest stop for a few minutes to try and look for white vans. I don't know what I could have done, maybe got a reg plate at least, but I've never seen them. It's terrifying thinking there's people out there like this. I'm just glad nothing ever happened then. First, I'm gonna say I'm a 16-year-old male with paranoia. I always carry a knife with me and get scared easily. I'm 175 pounds, 5'7" and a power lifter. I was crossing Alabama into Mississippi when I had to use a bathroom. My grandfather was driving me back to my dad's house in Jackson, MS. He pulled into a rest stop area and stretched his legs when I got to the bathroom. There was no security at the rest area, and bathroom is in the back of the building. The only person in there with me was at a urinal. I walked to the stall farthest from the door. As I walked by him, he turned around and started walking at me. His pants weren't unzipped at the urinal. He reaches for something in his pocket and I hear a flick. That's when I realized that something's in his hand, and I forgot my knife. I then see the bathroom door open and someone came in. The guy's coming towards me, put in his pocket in his hands, and left. This happened 2 weeks ago. The guy was white, bald in late 30s, maybe 40s. He had a black shirt with green cargo shorts, and I haven't really told many people about this. I'm very grateful that the stranger came in when he did. God knows what would have happened to me if he didn't. This was a story I grew up hearing my mum telling me about. I was really young when this happened, and I know for a fact it was before I was 5. I only have some foggy memory of the event, especially because my mum at the time didn't want to freak me out. Now, for some context, first, we have a family all over the country. I remember spending so much of my childhood just on the road trips from state to state to visit family, so we know our ins and outs on travelling. 2. When I was a child, I would randomly hug strangers telling them I loved them. I was so filled with joy and love that it just spilled over to everyone. There was basically only one stranger I never immediately latched onto the second I saw them, being this story. So my mum was talking to me, and we're taking a visit to see some relatives while my dad was staying at home with brothers. So, she had to go to house sit, and in general is a better caretaker of me than my father, so it made sense I went with her. We were driving for hours until we finally hit a rest stop, and so got out to use the bathroom. Now, there was already this guy in the parking lot, and according to my mum, it looked like he was watching everyone who entered and left the rest stop. The second we get out of the car, he did too. My mum held my hands as we went into the restroom, but immediately picks up on the fact that I let go of her hand to hold the other, the way facing the man. Now looking back, she told me that it was clear somewhere in my tiny child brain that I picked up on some sign of danger, because I avoided this man as much as I possibly could, and would quicken my pace to the restroom and car. I never did that with another stranger again. I had never blatantly avoided another adult like that. Anyway, as we do our business and head back to the car, the man had gone and left us, only then to follow us back in his own car. My mum immediately realised what was going on, trying to shake him off on the highway. He wouldn't budge, and tried to get as close as he could. Apparently while doing this, a semi-truck driver notices how frantic and off she was driving and could see her looking in the back. He realised what's going on and drove up to her side, making eye contact with her, and they're on the same page from then on out. Turns out, the driver called up on the radio to other truckers saying what was going on, and a bunch of drivers from different routes nearby came to the same highway that we're travelling on. A few minutes later, they began blocking out the other guy's car, and essentially trapped him away from my mum and I as she turned onto the next exit to find another rest stop, as the original truck driver follows us in. He got out and talked to my mum and told her he picked up what was happening, asking if we're okay, and drove with us to a Burger King and got something to eat. We talked and he got back onto the road until eventually we go separate ways. So to the guy who was probably going to kidnap me and my mum, thank God you never got a chance to, and thank God for the truck drivers who probably saved our lives. My dad works for a large printing company, and they completed an overnight rush job for a business. My dad got tasked with dropping the order off. It would take 8 hours each way to drop off the order. He was going to take my mum, as she's a retired teacher, and he figured it would be nice to have someone to drive each way. However, the night before he was going to leave my mum, he comes down with the flu. He left early the next morning and promises my mum if he gets tired, he's going to stop either at a restaurant or rest stop. So he made it without incident to drop off the papers. It's about noon when he set off again, and soon realises that the traffic's horrible. My dad decided that he'd take the long way home. It would add an hour or so, but he feared it would take longer to wait in the traffic. He drove straight for hours, until he realised he had to pee, and badly. My dad's a prostate cancer survivor, so needs to pee a lot. Also, he was starting to get sleepy and figured he should pull over and take a nap. It was winter, So about 4:30, now it's winter and about 4:30, and the sun started to set, and he notices a stop ahead, quite glad to be able to rest. He pulls up. Now, he does a little stretch, calls my mum to tell her that he's stopping to stretch his legs and maybe catch a nap, then heads to the bathrooms. Now the place was pretty much deserted. There's an old Chevy pickup next to my dad, and there was an RV with a family packing up that was probably their dinner. He went into the bathroom and opened the first stall. He was in there doing his business when he hears someone talking. He thinks at first they're talking to him until he realizes that the person A is on the phone, or B, they're talking to themselves. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. We'll just take another one and then bring it to the mother, the man said, almost singing to himself. My dad said he sounded like he was young, between late teens to early 20s. Then, before my dad could say anything, he starts unzipping his pants, starting to get weird. The guy randomly starts screaming, smashing his head onto the mirror and then on the wall. He started screaming in a more high-pitched voice now. At that, my dad runs out of the stall and he quickly opens a bathroom door running to his car. He locks the car door when he notices a skinny young man running out of the bathroom. He's looking for my dad and sees his car. My dad starts the car and begins backing up when he literally runs full tilt at him, screaming. My dad drove off. He's so badly shaken up by this that he had to pull over to the next town just to relax. He was paying for his coffee when that same Chevy pulls up. My dad grabs his coffee and hides his face. The kid walks in, goes up to the nice older cashier who my dad brought coffee from, throws his arms around this woman and starts sobbing about how he's sorry, mother, and how he let another one get away. My dad's heard more than enough now and quickly tosses his coffee away and quickly sprints to his car and makes it home safely. To this day, my dad refuses to stop at any rest stops now. He only stops at major places you can actually pull over at. For some context, I'm a 31-year-old female. I frequently visit the nearby provincial parks here that are generally well used in Canada. It's rare I end up on a hike not seeing at least one or two people. I grew up camping and hiking and feel very comfortable in nature. I always inform people where I'm going and when I should be back. Safety first, right? So one day last year, I was going stir crazy, so I took myself out to a popular educational centre. A branch of trails stem from this one spot. Now they're not long trails, but are all interconnected, so it's easy to create your own distance. It was midweek, so I wasn't expecting to encounter many people, maybe a school group at most. I grabbed my backpack, lock the car and head out. It was a beautifully sunny day, mid-autumn, so it was a little chilly out. I was listening to the sounds of nature surrounding me. Some squirrels, birds, even a deer crosses the trail at one point. I was sticking with the main trail, which had educational signs identifying different types of plants as you went along. I made my way up to the first little hill and made my way down the path where it takes a sharp turn. Up ahead, I caught sight of a man wearing a dark blue jacket. Strange, I hadn't seen any signs of this person or heard of them whatsoever. Normally, I'm comforted seeing someone else, but this time my gut was not happy. I made a note of what the person was wearing and went along. Blue Jacket had taken the path I wanted to take to create a longer hike. It would have been a lot more secluded and less travelled this way, just a nicer path generally. So for once, I tried to be smart, listen to my gut, to just follow the main route back to my car. I had about 2 kilometers to get back though. Clouds decided they wanted to skirt across the sky, making the woods a little dull and ominous. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling very unsettled. The trees casted finger-like shadows that did not help calm my imagination at all. One of my favourite spots on the main trail had a few massive boulders and rock formations smack in the middle that you have to go around. Really neat for photos and climbing on a normal day, but today they fill me with dread. I can't pinpoint why at first, until I found some scuffs around the base of the rocks going the wrong way round. The trail's very obvious which way to go, left, and these markings were wrong. It's like someone went the wrong way around the rocks, dragging their feet behind them. An animal? Maybe. I can't figure this out. I wanted to turn around and go back the way I came from, but that would have added 4 kilometers back to the car. I stuck close to the far side of the real path, keeping an eye close on the rock formation. As I made it to the other side of the rocks, I caught sight of some blue fabric, the same blue jacket I saw earlier. The person now suddenly ducks down, as if they're trying to avoid being seen. For Blue Jacket Man to reach the rocks before me, he either cut his own path through the woods or sprinted 5 kilometers. I don't like the prospect of either option. Maybe he was taking a leak. Yeah, I'll go with that. I pick up my pace and dug my phone out. I texted my usual hiking friend telling them the details in case I went missing. I glance behind me, and again I see him staring at me. I ran the rest of the way back to my car, hopping in, immediately locking the doors, and curiously, there's not a single other vehicle in the parking area. This place was nowhere near any towns, so I have no idea where this person came from. I took a couple of minutes to sort myself out in the car, and as I pull out to leave, I look at the trailhead, and that damn blue jacket was on the signpost that I had passed to get in my car, and no one's visible. I was so spooked out by this encounter that I refused to ever hike alone. So a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of Western MD, and we're about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we have done frequently when we decide to take some pictures and eat a snack at the summit. This area of the trail had a park, branches, benches and tables, and parking lots. So we're sitting and talking, and I noticed a man just walking around the park alone. He was walking aimlessly, staring at his feet, which confuses me, as he's in jeans, a button-down shirt and not exactly hiking attire. We now decide to set off on the last 2 miles of the loop. This park goes downhill to the headquarters of the park, and is cut out of the mountain/bank, and the end leg is the parking lot where your car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turn to look at her, and I see the same man right behind her, following at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any backpack or hiking gear, and not even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really scared me. So, a bit more walking and he continues to fall very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe. This is a reason for him to pass us. In case he's following us, we'll realise. She immediately catches on to what I'm doing and we pull over. He looks very startled and she politely says hello and he just stares. This is when I notice that he is carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stands between us and he passes us. We wait to give him some short distance ahead, but immediately he slows down. We now wait for a bit longer and he gets to the furthest part of the trail that has sight lines to us and he turns around, looking up at us. We decided that something feels wrong about this guy and we don't want to press him or pass him again. So we turn around and walk back up the trail towards a park with the tables and parking. A few minutes later of walking up the trail, I look back and see he's on the trail too. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area we were at before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail to the lot. There are more people around here, so we feel safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by, nothing. We are talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and is long gone, or is waiting on the trail where it's more desolated. While we're thinking this, we see a couple come up from the trail we're on, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction we're on. We approach them and ask if they saw the guy there. They tell us they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They describe the man as following us. We explain our interaction with him to the wife and go back and forth in conversation. The husband says we need to call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there, he was carving a stick with a knife. He's clearly armed. Needless to say, we call a ranger. The nice couple walked that fast leg with us to make sure that we can get to our car safely, and gave us their number in case we need anything. The rangers then rushed to the trail, but there's no sign of him. I wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad that I followed my instincts. I hate to think of what he would have done with a knife to us, out in the isolated part. A few months back, my girlfriend and I decide we're bored hanging around the house and spontaneously decide to go out for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appeals to both of us, and even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figure we have enough time to enjoy a hike before it gets too dark. We quickly fill our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes we had, and with that, we're out the door. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go into the mountains. We intended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking. We wanted to change things up and progress further up the mountain road of the trail that a friend of mine had mentioned to me. We kept in mind our time and figured that we could hike for a bit and simply enjoy the environment around us before it's too late. When we arrive at the trailhead, we see there are no cars left along the road where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we continue on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill. Then, this recoups the elevation at the bottom with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top, then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off the trail, some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with the coyote lurking round. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large fallen tree that made a bridge over the dried riverbed and decide to take a rest, climb around it, take some pictures. We're there for about 10 minutes and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance until she hears a rustle behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumption size of whatever made the rustling, but continue on only briefly before she decides she's done and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her. We turn around and head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my shoelaces and looked behind us for the first time on the hike. Now I can see a person dressed in entirely black with their hood on, a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. Now it's not something out of the ordinary, but why all black? It doesn't make any sense. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final section of the bend, I figure they're far behind us and there's nothing to worry about. Sooner than later though, they're behind us but much closer, probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before. We had increased our speed, and they have too, so this alarms us. We briskly walk around another bend, and as soon as we come around, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction on both of our parts as we start running without saying a word. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly come to a halt and look back at me as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point, I shout go, and we both sprint to the hill. What little light is left is making it very hard to get through here without tripping. We're both stumbling down it now, almost falling multiple times. I'm quite worried that I'm going to twist an ankle, but we make it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill, and then we'll have made it out. We preserve up the incline and make it back to the car. I have a sigh of relief, my heart pounding and adrenaline racing as I start my car. I go into reverse and, what do I see? The same person emerges, breathing heavily. We finally get a glimpse of him. He has a pale complexion and dead eyes, and has a furious look on his face and was holding something in his hands. I don't take a second to see it, I just speed out of there, leaving him in the dust. I was backpacking through Pisgah National Forest in NC with my dog, just the two of us. We were exploring the woods around Little Coast Cove, open orienteering style, so we're not on an established trail. We'd been hiking throughout the day, following a circle, and towards the evening, I realised my dog isn't acting normal. She's very much caught up in the scent of something, and she won't let up. That night in the camp, she remained on edge, and startled off into the woods line, stopping, then came back to me, staring. I went about camp business as usual. Then, at around midnight, I got this prickle like I'm being watched intently. I let the feeling ride over for a little, but then I heard a rustle by the bush. I got up from the fire, pointing my flashlight towards the hillside, and a figure on all fours just manages to escape the beam, all but the towel. It was a tale I knew was not supposed to exist in the southern Appalachians. I cast my light again across the hillside and caught its eyes, two yellow glowing orbs, watching and waiting. At this point, I went into fury, grabbing my tomahawk, and charged up the hill line after the beast, screaming. The watcher wandered off, but neither I nor the dog slept at all that night. The following morning we left camp. At first light, I began hiking up the mountain to the ridge line which would lead us out. Atop the ridge line is a fresh mud track with a series of tracks left by an animal that no longer is supposed to exist in the US. They're catamount tracks, or what I believe to be. They commonly go by cougars in the east, but we've been stalked by a mountain lion just the same. Those tracks ran across the ridge, revealing that it had been watching us throughout the previous day. They weren't bobcat tracks, I know that. They were way too big, and I saw the eyes. I truly believe that one's escaped, and if it wasn't for my dog, I would have been mauled to death that night. The neighbourhood where I grew up was more or less suburbs, except the back end of it that borders a massive field where nothing has been planted in decades. Part of that border is buffered by woods, and it's in those woods where my friends and I would play. One day, we were particularly deep in the little section of forest. We were attempting to pick through what looks like overgrown dozer tracks. The woods are thick across NT, but the central/eastern proportion is thick with kudus in particular, and it has given us hell. We had probably made a mile of progress in this track when we come across a depression full of water. I hesitate to even say it as a pond, because it was perfectly round like a crater. The water had obviously receded in the middle, and was exposing the roof of an old car. At about this time, one friend found a license plate under a pine duff. It was tagged with buckshot. Next to the door, a full car door had been buried under a pine duff, riddled with bullet holes. Now it's certainly not an uncommon way to have fun in the South. Go out, have a few beers and shoot some junk with your friends. But what we found next, however, wasn't a run-of-the-mill Saturday night. We find bones. Our still innocent minds first assumed it was a white-tailed deer. We started dragging out the bones and laying them out by the side. Not sure if our objective was to make a museum-quality deer skeleton or what, but that's what we did. Then the pelvis came up. I immediately recognised it because my uncle was a chiropractor and had a full model skeleton in his office called Mr. Bones that I would look at. The more I started to look at our growing collection, the more I started to see Mr. Bones taking shape. I got a gut feeling about being the oldest, and I told us to stop digging. Something really doesn't feel right here. There was some protest, but I convinced everyone. Now we start hiking back the way we come from, but I can't stop thinking about those bones. That night, I told my mum what I found, then I had to tell my dad the story. At first, they're convinced that I'm just a dumb kid, but I knew what I saw out there. They talked behind closed doors, going back and forth. The next day, I told the story to 2 sheriff deputies, and took them out to the area where I found this in the woods. About an hour later, there were police vehicles entering, packing the tiny dead end leading off into the woods. Chainsaws cleared the brush, and men in white suits with detective badges smoked cigarettes and talked amongst the other men as they carried bags from the forest, putting them into the vehicles. Then they were gone. And I waited months and months to hear anything, but nothing comes back. I asked my parents what happened, and they don't really know much about it. Eventually I stopped asking questions for the most part, and it faded back into my memory. Until one day I was home from college, sitting by the fire with an old neighbourhood friend who had been there that day. He saw everything I saw. We started talking about it for the next few hours. We started doing research online but can't find anything. It was so baffling. I asked my parents the next day and they still have no idea what I'm talking about. His parents said the same thing. To this day they're so adamant that nothing happened. It's crazy.